This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. The International Criminal Court in The Hague orders the conditional release of Laurent Gbagbo, the former president of Ivory Coast. A deepening row between Ghana and the US. Washington imposes visa restrictions after it says Ghana is refusing to take back citizens staying illegally in the US. Also in the program, cleaning up for health. Sierra Leoneans sweep the streets of Freetown in a drive to improve hygiene. And in sport, with the football transfer window now shut in most of Europe, we take a look at some of the last-minute deals. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. In the last couple of hours, the International Criminal Court in the Netherlands has ordered the release of Laurent Gbagbo, that's the former president of Ivory Coast, 2 weeks after he was acquitted of crimes against humanity. He will not, however, be allowed to return to his country. The charges against Mr. Gbagbo related to the death of 3,000 people following his refusal to accept defeat in elections in 2010. Now, in a moment, we'll be discussing what this means for Mr. Gbagbo and for his supporters and detractors in Ivory Coast. But first, Anna Holligan reports from the ICC in The Hague.
The prosecution lawyers here at the ICC said that they didn't actually object to Laurent Gbagbo being freed. They simply want to be sure that he will come back because, of course, they are planning to appeal against this acquittal and they're worried that if there is a retrial, he simply won't show up. So they made two suggestions. First of all, that he should be released into the custody of a neighbouring country, for example, Belgium, and that he and his colleague, the former youth leader Charles Blé Goudé, be forced to hand over their passports. Now, Laurent Gbagbo's lawyers argued that he should be free to go wherever he wants to, including home to the Ivory Coast. In their words, it is impossible to limit the freedom of an innocent person.
Well, I'm now joined by BBC Africa's Prudent Nsengdiuva. Prudent, is the conditional release of Mr. Gbagbo, was this a surprise?
It's a little bit of a surprise, but again, if you look at how he was cleared and the judgment was unanimous, so people were really saying, why do you keep him? If the prosecution want to appeal, then he should be free in the meantime.
So then what does it do to the politics in Ivory Coast? Because he does have some support there, isn't he?
Indeed, he still has strong support. In fact, yesterday there were a lot of former members of his political party who returned from exile where they were living in Western African countries, including 5 ex-ministers. So they say they are coming, importantly, they say they are not coming because of what the current president Alassane Ouattara did with the amnesty last year. They're coming because, as they put it, their leader is free. And if their leader is free, they are free as well.
So what do we expect then from Ivory Coast, especially with this news that there is a conditional release for Mr. Gbagbo?
It's very interesting to see what is going to happen in the next couple of months, especially that the next year there is an election. I mean, so it's very early to speculate whether he's going to run, but he has a support in the country, and it is going to be watched very closely to see who he supports if he does not run, and whether some of his ex-ministers or some of his cabinet decide to run, for instance. There are other key members, of course, in the politics of Ivory Coast. The current president of the National Assembly, Guillaume Soro, who was also a former prime minister. If you remember, in 2002, he was the face of the rebels that launched attacks on the former president Laurent Gbagbo that ignited the civil war in 2002. Now he's the president of the National Assembly. He's a key, and also Charles Blé Goudé. He's also very key to watch.
All right. Just very quickly, is it clear where Mr. Gbagbo now will go to? Now that we really don't know we don't know the place he's going to go to, but we know that he's not going to Ivory Coast. We don't
know where he's going, but it's very unlikely that he's going to go to Ivory Coast. But Belgium has accepted to receive him, especially because of his second wife actually lives in Belgium and his son. So they have accepted to receive him. But for Charles Blagbo, no one knows where he's going to go.
All right, Prudon Nsenkiyuma, thank you for your thoughts. Thank you. Now, a diplomatic standoff has arisen between the United States and Ghana after Ghana refused to take back citizens staying illegally in the U.S. Now, the U.S. wants to deport 7,000 Ghanaians, accusing them of immigration offenses. It says it will begin implementing restrictions to visas from Monday. Washington says those affected by the ban will include the domestic staff of diplomats posted to the U.S. But if Ghana fails to comply with U.S. demands, the restrictions could be expanded to the wider population. Now, discussions between the two countries over the issue have been going on since July 2016. Well, the BBC's Thomas Nadi is following all the developments and has more now on how this diplomatic row could affect their international relations.
Ghana and the U.S. have enjoyed years of bilateral relations, and this latest sanction has come as a surprise to many. The two countries have signed several agreements in the areas of trade and security. This current impasse is likely to strain their relations. The U.S. says that the deportees are Ghanaians and is demanding the Ghana government issue them new travel documents so they can be deported back to Ghana. But the Ghana embassy in the U.S. is refusing to comply. An international relations expert in Ghana says that the U.S. has an obligation to prove to Ghana that those detained are indeed Ghanaians. Ghana's ambassador to the U.S. expressed concern about the inhuman treatment of some Ghanaians who were deported from the U.S. 2 years ago. The visa sanction takes effect on Monday, and there's a lot of uncertainty about how this diplomatic standoff will be resolved.
Let's now go to Accra and speak to Adib Sani. He is a foreign policy and security analyst. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on Focus on Africa. Why do you think the Ghanaian government is not willing to accept its own nationals?
Well, we have a problem with the youth bulge in Ghana, where a lot of Ghanaians are unemployed. According to a 2017 World Bank report, we have about 48% of Ghanaian men and women between the ages of 15 to 24 unemployed. So there is no social intervention to absorb some of these immigrants, and so would pose a bit of a burden to the Ghanaian authorities, hence their lack of commitment towards the process. Because it is quite obvious that the Ghanaian authorities are dragging their feet, and this didn't come overnight. Indeed, the Americans warned the Ghanaian government way back in August 2018. And it's even on the heel of former Attorney General of the United States, Judge Sessions, who declared a zero tolerance for illegal immigration in the U.S., including those from the southern border. And it didn't exclude Africans as well, even though we constitute a little percentage of those illegal immigrants in the U.S. But that notwithstanding, I'm sure this is just for the Americans to prove to the Ghanaians that indeed they mean business.
Right, so how do you see this playing out? Because it's a really grey area.
Indeed, it is a grey area, and it's particularly disturbing because there's been a very cordial, progressive relationship between the Americans and the Ghanaians way back after we gained our independence. We've cooperated amongst ourselves in several areas, from social to political to economic and even security issues. Recently, we had the Defense Cooperation Agreement between the Ghana government and the United States government. So for me, I think to a very large extent, the Americans feel they have been pushed to the wall, and so they were left with no other excuse or no other option but to prove to the Ghanaian counterparts that, look, we mean business and we are not willing to change our stance towards this immigration issue. Right. And I think it is high time the Ghanaian authorities took this seriously so it doesn't degenerate into something much more complex than we can handle.
You mentioned that the Ghanaian government should take this seriously. What should they do now, and how long do you think they will not blink for?
Well, I can understand the frustration of the Ghanaian authorities, taking into consideration the fact that we already have economic issues with regard to joblessness, etc. But I think when they cooperate, or when they work together with civil society organizations, we can get these illegal immigrants absorbed into society, get them something little they can restart life with, so they don't become burden to these societies. Let us not also forget about the fact that these guys are breadwinners for their families. So obviously them coming back would have rippling economic effects on extended family members. So I think it is up to the Ghanaian authorities to collaborate with civil society.
Okay, all right. I'm afraid we have to leave it there, but we hear what you're saying. Adib Sani there in Accra. Thank you for your thoughts on this very important subject. Thank you. Well, let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa. Education officials in South Africa say at least 3 students have been killed after a school building collapsed in the south of Johannesburg. 23 more were injured after a walkway reportedly collapsed. Now, the school is now closed and investigations are underway to find the cause of the collapse. The mother of a 3-year-old girl in the UK has been found guilty of female genital mutilation, the first ever conviction of the crime in the country. The 37-year-old, originally from Uganda, could face up to 14 years in jail. The girl's child's father was acquitted. The United Nations Security Council will review the arms embargo on the Central African Republic with a deadline of September to assess steps towards a partial lifting of the ban. Now, the government has repeatedly asked for restrictions to be eased to shore up its security forces. The embargo was imposed in 2013. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come with Super Bowl 53 this weekend. We catch up with 2-time winner and BBC pundit Osi Umenyora about growing the game in Africa. I'm Sophie Ikenye and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The top stories on this program: the International Criminal Court in The Hague orders the conditional release of Laurent Gbagbo, the former president of Ivory Coast, after his acquittal of war crimes. A deepening row between Ghana and the US. Washington imposes visa restrictions after it says Ghana is refusing to take back citizens staying illegally in the US. Now, for years, citizens across the continent have been taken to the streets once a month to clean up. Countries such as Rwanda, with the Umuganda Day, the Nigeria people, Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia all have similar schemes. Sierra Leone launched theirs last year. On the first Saturday of every month, everyone stops what they're doing and comes together to clean up. Now, the campaign was introduced by the country's president in order to improve everyone's hygiene.
I don't think say any somebody go there when a peaceful Sierra Leonean when I go like this initiative here for clean the country. And all man say the key reason for the cleanliness for prevent we against sickness, because health business now income number 1. You know go find for let the country go there in dirty.
The idea of National Cleaning Day is to create a platform where citizens all over the country are reminded of the importance of having a clean environment.
That thing where I go left for every country in the world for me them go do.
Well, we've put a question on our Twitter page to find out what people think of the National Cleaning Days. The comments were quite varied and mixed, really. Some in support, others saying it's the responsibility of governments. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Ade Adeyemi. He is an Assistant Fellowship Director for the Center on Global Health Security at Chatham House, an independent policy institute. Thanks for taking time to talk to us in the program. What do you think? Should governments be doing this or the people?
Absolutely. Sanitation and hygiene is the cornerstone of public health. I was thinking about the response to the question, and I thought about my 7-month-old daughter. And I thought, if I want to give her food and develop her and make her grow, you don't give it on a dirty plate, you sanitize the equipment. And equally, if you want to think about economic development across Sierra Leone, you need a clean environment, clean water and quantities of water, and a clean, hygienic environment is the way to do that.
But who should be responsible for doing that? Because a lot of people, even on social media, are talking about this is supposed to be the council's work, really, especially when it comes to things like drainage cleaning and that kind of stuff.
Again, in the context of Sierra Leone's story and its development, given it's still a young country, and that's why I use my daughter as an example, I think there's some questions you have to ask about how much the government can do. If it doesn't have the capacity to do so, then part of its story is that citizens getting involved as well. The governments are a representation of citizens, and so together, that's how development, I think, can work.
So it also creates cohesiveness.
Absolutely, absolutely. Citizens feel a sense of belonging and ownership of their communities, and it creates the right environment and context for public health initiatives to go further, and for people to feel better and live longer and feel well.
I mean, we got a few comments on Twitter, and some of them were really funny, I should say. There's one here who said, we in Zambia, we used to do it every last Saturday of the month. The problem is it's highly politicized. You know, politicians used to do photo shoots in work clothes and trying to get cheers from the audiences. What do you make of that? Do politicians take advantage of this?
Unfortunately, they do, just as they do in this country with the National Health Service. I think health respects no political parties. Germs respect no political parties, and they don't respect borders. And so it's incumbent on citizens to do the best they can, regardless of who's in government, to make sure that their communities are clean, that they have access to clean water, and that germs and litter don't clutter the mind and don't create a sense of uncleanliness and dirtiness in their environments.
If you were to give advice to governments that are looking to having a clean-up day, what would it be?
It would be
a successful clean-up day, so to speak,
It would be to have the strength of leadership that we've seen from Sierra Leone. To suggest this needs, leadership and needs governance to say to the citizens, look, together we need to do this. And it's with the support of multilateral organisations like WHO and the Centre of Disease Control and the African Union that governments like this can understand the tools and how to build capacity amongst citizens to take ownership and to get everyone on board to clean up. But the key is the leadership and encouraging and getting everyone on board to do more across the areas.
All right, Adeyemi, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts on
Thanks for having me.
This subject. Thank you. Now, one of Uber's top bosses has told the BBC that the firm is trying to rebuild trust with drivers in Africa after protests on the continent over pay and safety. Uber's European and Africa chief, Pierre-Dimitri Gore-Coty, spoke exclusively to Clarisse Fortuné from the BBC's Cash Eco Economy.
We're working really, really hard to rebuild trust with drivers, to make sure that the platform is as safe as possible from their perspective, and to make sure that the earning opportunity for them is actually a good and healthy earning opportunity.
But do you think an African driver can make money at the end of it?
Each and every driver uses the app in slightly different ways. Some drivers have more expensive cars, some have cheaper ones, and so based on all of those parameters, you can have slightly different earning patterns.
How do you ensure, for example, the security of passengers?
In many African countries, what we have done is we have made it anonymous for riders and drivers to contact one another. And so a lot of things like that we're trying to do literally every day to make sure the ride is as safe as possible.
Why are you not in Francophone countries?
Yeah. I mean, we are not in the business of launching and asking questions later. We actually want to do that hand in hand with city stakeholders, with government officials. And it happens that in many of the Francophone countries, the regulatory environment is not totally suited for what we are actually after. And so we're actually now engaging in a lot of conversations to see whether there'd be opportunities to change some aspects of the regulation to make sure that we can embrace new mobility options such as the Uber option.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's time now for some sports with Mimi.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Now, let's get straight to the transfers going on. And at the moment, African football transfers that were concluded on Thursday. DR Congo's Yannick Bolasie managed to get his transfer in 43 seconds before the window closed in most of Europe. That's according to reports. Bolasie went from Everton to Anderlecht in Belgium. And Ghana's Sule Montari completed a move to Spanish second division side Albacete. The 34-year-old has been without a club since leaving Deportivo La Coruna last summer. Another transfer that was confirmed on Thursday was Ivory Coast striker Wilfred Bony. He joined Qatari club Al Arabi on loan until the end of the season from Swansea City. And Nigeria forward Azizat Oshoala has completed a loan move to Barcelona women until the end of the season. It's a win-win situation for both sides. The 24-year-old joins from Chinese champions Dalian Quanjian while the league is in its off-season, but at the same time, it helps to keep the 3-time African Female Player of the Year in shape ahead of the Women's World Cup this summer. The Tunisian Football Federation has announced a friendly against last summer's World Cup runners-up Croatia. The match is set up for the 11th of June in Croatia. It's part of the North African country's preparations ahead of the Africa Cup of Nations. It will be the first ever meeting between the two nations. African Champions League action this weekend, where two former champions will be going head-to-head. South Africa's Mamelodi Sundowns will be hosting ASEC Mimosa of the Ivory Coast today. All 4 teams in that group, which includes Wydad Casablanca and Nigeria's Lobby Stars, are here on 3 points. To the English Premier League, one of the big fixtures to look out for this weekend, Manchester City, who hosts Arsenal at home. City will be hoping not to drop any more points after that shock loss away to Newcastle on Tuesday. They are 5 points behind Liverpool, who are top of the table. City's manager Pep Guardiola says they face a challenge of bouncing back from the defeat.
The situation that we have in this week is the same in the last 2 months, 2 or 3 months. So it's not news. So it's happened. Challenge is the only way I know to after negative result is focusing in the play, and you know, in the mentality to say, okay, we are in the 1st of February, a lot of points to play, and still many things going to happen.
There are anticipations building in Atlanta, where preparations are continuing for Super Bowl 53. The LA Rams will be going head-to-head with the New England Patriots on Sunday. Former New York Giants defensive end and now a BBC pundit, Ossie Omenora, who won 2 Super Bowls during his career, spent much of his childhood in Nigeria before going to college in the United States. And he says more should be done to make the sport more accessible to African players.
Africans in general, we're the most athletic people on the planet. That's not to take anything away from anybody else. This is just, you know, the way it is. I think the thing with American football is that it requires so much equipment and so much coaching and so much infrastructure to play the game that, you know, it becomes more difficult than playing, you know, soccer. In Nigeria, we just on the streets, we're playing soccer, fella-led ball. You know what fella-led? The little rubber balls, we're playing with those. And so it's very easy to play, whereas football, it requires a lot of structure. But as far as like getting the athletes and developing them, I think that's 100% something that the NFL should look at. It's a big market. Nigeria, almost 200 million people, you understand, and there's just so much potential for developing talent from those regions.
And that's all the sport. Back to you, Sophie.
Yet some good news again on the African players in the NFL.
Yes, building on from the past couple of days, we've been seeing lots of African players coming out, African heritage. Great point that he makes. I think they need to get, as he was saying, more investment in Africa, the NFL, to get more players to play in the NFL.
Young potential players.
Absolutely. The loads on the continent, as you know, it's a bit more expensive than just picking up a football and kicking around on the street.
Well, Mimi, thanks for the sport. Thank you. Well, that's it on the program from me and the rest of the Focus on Africa team. Thanks for your company. Bye-bye.